Every year I get more confused that it's time to do this again, like I'm unfamiliar with how calendars work. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today it is my turn to take the mid-year book freakout tag. I kind of can't believe that we're at the midpoint of the year already, and I've got so many books already that I have read so far, and quite a couple of them that I'm going to be talking to you about today. As per usual, I have seen this floating around the internet so much recently, kind of from the start of mid-June, but let's take a look at my answers. The first question is, what was the best book that you have read so far in 2022? This is a kind of a no challenge, no competition situation. It was The Appeal by Janice Hallett. I distinctly remember coming off work, picking the book up. I think by that stage I was probably only about 10 pages into the book overall. I said I would just sit in my corner chair and read it for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour before I started making dinner. That was at 7 o'clock in the evening. I did not stop reading this book until 1:15 in the morning. I was mesmerized. I was obsessed with this book. I texted a couple of friends of mine who had already read it and said, I think that this is what's happening here. I think this is my kind of interpretation on how it goes. If you ever look at my reading journal, the page for The Appeal is just wall to wall post-it notes of my thoughts, of my instincts, of my ideas. Because one of my friends told me, when you're reading this book, keep a note of everything that you think is going to be important. And I delivered. This book follows the inhabitants of a small village called Lockwood, and there's a dramatic society that is putting on a performance of All My Sons by Arthur Miller, and one of the players in the cast, their granddaughter is sick with cancer, so they start a kind of a fundraising appeal to raise money to kind of save the child's life. This book is told mainly in the form of emails, in the form of texts, in the form of communication between all of the 15 people who are the suspect for a murder that has happened. You don't know who died, you don't know how they died, and your job is to figure it out. You're not alone though in working the case. There are also 2 law students who have been given all of this correspondence between everyone in the community, and their task is to also figure out who was responsible for the murder, who was murdered, why, and why does somebody else know what happened. I was hooked on this book. Once I picked it up, there was absolutely no way that I could have put it back down again, and I have pushed it into so many people's hands. I implore you to read this one. Next up, what is the best sequel that you've read so far in 2022? And again, this was no competition. Again, Rachel by Marion Keyes. You are re-entering Rachel's life 25 years after she has come out of rehab for drug addiction, for drug abuse, and she is very much living the clean and straight life, to the point that Rachel is actually now one of the therapists and one of the employees at the cloisters, which is where she came through first for help. However, somebody from Rachel's life back then is coming back onto the scene, and this might throw the entire life that Rachel has built herself right into chaos. Something that I loved about this book is that, again, you can see just how personal this is to Marion. There's a lot of instances in this book that you can kind of tell without knowing that this is probably something that's happened to Marion in her life. And I absolutely loved how these were dealt with such respect and such tact. And I really enjoyed this book. As well as that, you get to see what the Walsh family are up to, and not just the 5 Walsh sisters and their parents that you would have known about, but also now their kids, their new partners, and all of the kind of family dynamic that you would expect to see in that. Question 3 is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but really want to? And that is Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. Christina Lauren is one of my absolute all-time favorite writing duos. Anything that they have written has just touched to gold for me, so I have got pretty high hopes for this one. However, I have got a little bit of trepidation going into it because I've heard that this is a second chance romance, and those don't necessarily gel super well with me, but I'm going to give it its best shot. This is about Lily and Leo, who have known each other for years. They're both kind of in the same circle of employment. I think both of them work as kind of archaeologists on dig sites. There's a little bit of a Western vibe to this, I believe I've heard on the grapevine. So that's also going to be something kind of newly charted territory for me, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Question 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the next half of the year? I've got two that are definitely on my radar no matter what. First one is The Christmas Wish by Lindsay Kelk. Lindsay Kelk is one of my favourite authors of all time. She's an absolute auto-buy author for me, and I have absolutely loved the last two books that she has brought out, In Case You Missed It and On a Night Like This. If The Christmas Wish is anything like the two of those, I know that I'm going to have a great time. The next book I can't wait to get my hands on is A Million to One by Adiba Jagidar. This is going to be her third book, I believe. And as soon as I heard the words Sapphic Heist on the Titanic, I was in. I cannot wait to see how that is going to play out, especially knowing what I know about the fate of the Titanic. And I was a high-key Titanic girl when I was younger. Actually, that phase has not ended. So anything to do with the Titanic, I am already in. Question 5 is your biggest disappointment. And sadly, this was Mad About You by Vari McFarlane. Vari and I have a kind of a tumultuous relationship. I either give it 5 stars or I DNF it. There's absolutely no in between. And this one was sadly a DNF. You're following Harriet, who has just left a relationship and is looking for a new place to live, and she ends up living with a guy named Sam. Throughout the book, you start to learn about Harriet's previous relationship and how it was incredibly toxic, incredibly manipulative, and what her ex-boyfriend was truly like. You especially learn this when she's at a wedding as a photographer and notices that he is there but with a new partner in tow. And she's kind of umming and ahhing as to whether or not to send a letter to this new partner about what her previous partner was like. Reading the letter that Harriet eventually did end up sending was just a little bit too harrowing and a bit too on the nose for me. So that is where this book and I parted ways. And to be very honest, I don't know if I'm going to go back to a Vari McFarlane book again in the future. I think I've just had a little bit too much of an up and down relationship with her that I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to go back to it. Question 6 is your biggest surprise. And again, I have to give props to the appeal. Like I said, I expected to kind of pick in and out of this book, not get too invested in it, just kind of plod along, see where the story was taking me. 6 hours later, that hypothesis proved completely false. I could not let the day go by without knowing what had happened in this book. I had taken so many notes that I just wanted to know if I was right, if I had been on the right track, had I missed anything. I don't usually go back and reread thrillers, but I think knowing what I know now, having everything written down, figuring it all out, I'm going to maybe go back and see if there's something that I could have picked up on the first time, if there's something that I missed out, if there's something that I felt like a little bit obvious now that I have all of the hindsight with me. I might have to go back and pick this one up again. Question 7 is your favourite new author, be they a debut author or somebody who's new to you. And for me, it's not a debut as such. This is their adult debut, but they've written quite a lot of YA fiction before, and that is Ashley Herring-Blake. I picked up Delilah Green Doesn't Care back in April, and I was obsessed. Delilah Green slowly turned into one of my favourite characters of the year. Claire and Delilah's relationship slowly turned into one of my favourite relationships throughout the year, and I was absolutely hooked on this book. I loved watching their relationship kind of develop, fall from the kind of frosty starting that it had and develop a lot more over the course of the book. I know that Ashley Herring-Blake has got a couple of YA books, as I've said, but there's also a second book in this series coming out, I think around September or October time, and I am so invested in finding out what happens to Astrid, who is one of the side characters in this book. Question 8 is your new favourite fictional crush. I don't usually get a lot of book crushes, which is quite weird when you consider that the primary genre that I read is contemporary romance. But this year, I completely fell in love with somebody. Russell Barringer from Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. Take a step forward. Russell is such a wonderful character. He also has quite a lot of insecurities that I don't think I've ever seen addressed from a male character in a romance book. He has quite a lot of insecurities about his size. He's a single parent, so he's not entirely sure how that's going to be received by the people that he's dating. And I really loved watching his and Ari's relationship develop from friend to something a little bit more as we go through the course of this book. Question 9 is one that I have kind of already answered. Who is your new favourite character? And that is Delilah Green from Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I love Delilah's I don't really care about anything attitude. She is completely hilarious. She's completely comfortable in who she is. And she is kind of an inspiration for me. I would love to have her kind of confidence and her sassiness. I respect Delilah so much. I really hope that she appears in Astrid's book because I am very ready to see more of her. Question 10 is to name a book that made you cry, which I always have to skip because I'm a little bit of a hard nut. I never really cry at books. I also don't particularly tend to cry at a lot of films, at a lot of TV shows. It does take quite a lot to get me going. So I never really have an answer to that. So we're just instead gonna go straight through to question 11, which is a book that made you happy. And again, I'm going to mention Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. It follows Ari and Russell, who notice a kind of a tumultuous relationship between their bosses, who have previously been married and are now divorced. It's making for quite a difficult workplace atmosphere, so the two of them decide to play the parent trap and get Seth and Torrance back together. Of course, while they're working on this, they start to have a little bit more of a deeper connection between themselves as well. There's a reveal halfway through the book of what was actually going on, and I absolutely loved that kind of a situation. But also something that made me happy about this book was the steam level. I went into it kind of expecting a sort of fluffy, light romance with closed door scenes, but boy was I mistaken. There were two pretty steamy sex scenes kind of towards the middle to 8/3 of the book, and I absolutely loved them. This is the first of Rachel Lynn's books that I have actually read, even though I've got a copy of the X-Talk behind me on my shelf, and now I'm ready to get to that one. Question 13 is, what is the most beautiful book that you have gotten this year? Whether you bought it, you received it as a gift, you read it in the library, however you got it, what one had the best cover? And that one for me is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. It's a little bit of a new venture for me. I don't read a whole lot of historical fiction based around Greek mythology, but I'm interested and I'm going to give it a go. I got this one in a kind of a blind date with a book that my local bookshop was running, where everything was just wrapped in plain brown paper and had a little sentence to kind of give you an idea of what was behind the book. I don't even remember what the sentence behind the book was, but I had gotten the romance book and it was one that I had already read and already didn't enjoy, so I brought it back and instead I went for the historical fiction. I'm really glad that I did. It's a new venture for me, as I've said, but I'm not going to let that deter me. Final question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And there are two that come to my mind immediately. The first I've already mentioned is The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. It's been on my shelf for a while now, but having read Weather Girl and having absolutely adored it, I know that I don't have anything to worry about Rachel Lynn Solomon's writing style, about her storytelling techniques, and about the spice level that she puts into her books. So I have a feeling it's going to be a winner. Another one that I can't wait to read, but I'm a little bit apprehensive about, is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Tessa Bailey and I haven't always gotten on great. I don't love her sex scenes. I don't love the style of dirty talk that she has in her books, but I love Schitt's Creek. It's one of my favourite shows of all time, and I know that It Happened One Summer is a kind of a Schitt's Creek reimagining of Ted and Mutt's relationship. So, with that in mind, I bought a copy of the physical book because every other Tessa Bailey book I've experienced, I read as an audio book, and having someone in your ear saying baby girl every 20 seconds is the opposite of a turn on. I'm hopeful and crossing my fingers that if I read the book in any kind of written format, we're going to get on a bit better. Those are my answers to the mid-year booked freakout tag. If you've taken this tag, please let me know below because I would love to come and check out your thoughts too. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.